Hi, this is Mike Casey for San Mateo County History Stories for Penn TV. I'm seated here nursing an Irish coffee at historical Malloy's in Colma. Now let's get one thing straight. Owen Malloy and his staff here at Malloy's are as honest as the day is long. But it was in a similar drinking establishment, not far from here, right up the road, top of the hill, what is now Daly City, at Mission and San Jose, at the Abbey House, that Chris Lilly and his gang schemed, connived, and plotted to make sure the 1856 birth of San Mateo County was an illegitimate one. Here's the way the story goes. From the gold rush to 1856 in the city of San Francisco, it was one corrupt government after another. The city fathers tried to clean up the city, get rid of the corruption many times. But at that time, the city and the county governments were separate. When the rascals got wished out of the city government, they found a place in the county government. Vice versa. When they cleaned up the county government, they snuck back into the city government. The solution? Combine the city and county governments of San Francisco to get rid of the corruption and make for a more honest government. Assemblyman Horace Hawes in 1856 went about that with a bill introduced in Sacramento to combine the city and county governments. Now, the crooks got wind of this, and their friends in Sacramento added an addendum to the bill. Why not split the county in two at the same time? Their plan was to split the county 1/10, the city of San Francisco, as we know it now, and 9/10, a new county of San Mateo, which is what we know now as San Mateo County. Now, that was to take effect in July of 1856. The crooks had a plan: get down here in May, run an election where they can rig it and steal every one of the county offices and make the county seat in Belmont. Here was part of their plan also. There were 11 precincts. If they could control 3 of the precincts by intimidation, by stuffing the ballot boxes, by having a list of fictitious voters, they'd be in. By the way, those fictitious voters were gotten off the passenger list of a recently arrived steamer from Panama. The election was going to take place on May 12th, 1856. Here's the way it was going to work. Chris Lilly and the Mulligan brothers, Billy and Bernie, would take care of the Abbey House precinct in the North County. Over at Crystal Springs to the west, they would send 5 of their henchmen, 5 of their toughest thugs, act as election judges. They figured the farmers out there would be none the wiser. Believe it or not, one of their election judges was one of the most colorful characters, and I'm not making this up, a guy by the name of Liverpool Jack. The 3rd precinct was going to be in Belmont, where the slippery ex-governor of California, John McDougal, would hold an election at his house. That would be the 3rd precinct that they would rig. Now, McDougal had visions of making Belmont the county seat to increase the value of all the property owned there and to make a comeback in California politics. Now, maybe it would have worked, but was it stupidity? Was it overconfidence? There were too many witnesses. On the day of the election, Election Commissioner Charles Clark, up at the Abbey House, counted 500 votes in a precinct with only 50 registered voters. Over at Crystal Springs, 3 alert farmers, Huffaker, Hutchinson, and Harrisby, noticed the thugs there, noticed they were strangers, stayed by the precinct, counted 297 votes, where there normally was only 25 voters in the precinct. Now, Charles Fair was over at Belmont. He said the voting booth was so far back in McDougal's house that nobody could see what was happening. But we can imagine from what we saw witnessed in the other precincts. Well, the intimidation continued the next day down in Redwood City, the 13th, where they counted all the votes. There were 3 election commissioners, James Johnston, Charles Clark, R.O. Tripp. R.O. Tripp bailed out. He figured something was amiss and it wasn't a fair election. The other 2 commissioners went about tabulating the votes. That was interspersed with intimidating visits from Chris Lilly and Billy Mulligan to make sure the vote was going their way. And they made sure it better go their way or else. Well, the 2 commissioners realized the election was rigged by then. They stopped the vote and they turned it over to the courts to decide whether it was a fair election or not. Now, believe it or not, Ben Fox was elected county judge in the same election, and he was one of the few honest candidates. Well, Ben Fox took a look at it, had some witnesses, the same witnesses that I talked about that were up at the Abbey House and over at Crystal Springs, and it was obvious that it was a rigged election. He turned everything over to the second place finishers, and he proclaimed Redwood City the county seat rather than Belmont. Now you might be asking, Mike, what happened to this gang? They were intimidating up to this point. Why didn't they contest Fox's rulings? Well, the election coincided with the second appearance of the vigilante committees in 1856 in San Francisco. It was precipitated by the two cold-blooded murders of San Francisco citizens. Gambler Charles Cora murdered Federal Marshal William Richardson in the streets of San Francisco. James Casey, no relation, murdered James King of William, the editor of the San Francisco Bulletin, in cold blood also. That put the heat on the gang. The vigilantes were determined that once and for all they were going to get rid of this gang. So all of the people that ran the election in San Mateo could not contest it. 4 of them were hung, 30 were deported, and that so ended the almost scandalous beginning to the county of San Mateo. Now this is a pretty tangled web to unravel. I've only given you the main highlights. If you're interested in learning more about it, I recommend that you read Mitch Postal's San Mateo County, A Sesquicentennial History. I'm Mike Casey, and I'll see you next time on San Mateo County History Stories.